So Tom, it's a little cold out right now. We have a bit of a polar vortex making its way through the northern hemisphere.
As they say where I grew up, Dave, it's damn cold. And you know, it is a powerful, striking, freezing reminder of basic threats to human health and well-being. When you look through the human history, basic elements out there in nature, diseases, vicious animals, extreme weather, right? Things like this. I mean, traditionally for human beings, those were the greatest threats to human health and well-being. And it strikes me as this odd thing. We live at a moment in the United States today, we're in 2021, we are more progressive in every sense of the word, right? I mean, the country, our public policies, our citizens. There are more citizens who call themselves progressive than ever before in American history. And progressives run around insisting that people have a right to health care. And of course, what they really mean is they have a right to health.
Right.
I mean, the purpose of health care is to be healthy, right? And yet there are people dying in places like Houston, Texas. And you know what they're dying from right now? They're freezing.
Right.
They're freezing. They can't stay warm. They can't find a source of warmth. And it raises this whole question. People say, well, I care about others. I'm a progressive because I care. And I want people to be healthy and happy. That's why I support universal health care, and I support raising the minimum wage, and I support a Green New Deal because I really care. And yet those very policies lead to things like people freezing to death because there's no reliable source of heat at the moment. First of all, I'm hoping that people immediately find a source of warmth.
Right.
I have some sister-in-law and a brother-in-law in Houston. I mean, it's gotten cold.
Yeah.
Last I heard, it was, I think, 16 degrees. Like, it's good. It's not just below freezing. Like, it's really cold. And my sister and brother-in-law built a beautiful new house. And in their neighbors, their water lines are freezing and bursting.
Well, it's not something that people in Houston and Texas and most of the South think about, right? We live in Colorado. We've spent our time. You grew up in Kansas.
Yeah.
You know you have to insulate your pipes. You know you have to. I remember years ago when we first moved into the house that I grew up in, my mom had to put heating pads around some of the pipes.
Yeah.
It got so cold right at the point where it entered the house. You put heating pads on the pipe just so you could plug them in and keep that water flowing. It's not something that people in Houston, Texas ever think about, or Alabama or New Orleans.
Right. Well, and I was checking on them this morning down in Houston, making sure they're okay. And she said, oh yeah, they when they built their house, right along with the construction, they had a generator built. And I asked her, I said, I'm curious, what powers the generator? What fuels the generator? She said, natural gas, of course. Right? And there's a moment here for us. First, the first priority is I want people to be warm and safe. And I'm hoping that those who have power, have some sources of heat, will share it with their friends and their neighbors and take care of each other until this terrible Arctic vortex blows past. And then when things have settled down, to step back and take a look. I mean, there's an immediate topic here. The immediate topic is how do we get reliable, affordable sources of energy? I mean, energy is, even cavemen, what is it that they wanted to make? But even before the wheel, I mean, the wheel was a big deal, but even before you get the wheel. Fire. Man, fire's a source of energy, right? It's a source of warmth. If you're in a cave and it's dropping down into the teens and negative numbers, you're going to freeze to death. You need a source of energy.
And it's a way to feed yourself.
That's right.
I mean, when you have no energy, Texas is experiencing these rolling blackouts. There was actually as a little tangent, there was a joke in the Babylon Bee yesterday, and I will always give them credit. It's amazing.
They're good.
But there was a joke in the Babylon Bee yesterday saying Texas making Californians feel at home with rolling blackouts. So all the Californians who are moving, who are following Elon Musk to Texas, are now feeling at home with rolling blackouts. But if you think about it, it's not just heat. When you have no electricity, when you have no source of power, all the food in your refrigerator spoils.
Yep.
You have no way of heating anything up. Warm bowl of soup.
Yep.
How are you going to warm it up? You're going to create a fire in your kitchen. I mean, that's what you're left with.
Right.
So there really is
even on bigger scale, large water purification facilities for large cities. What makes them go? Power, electricity. When there's no electricity, the water purification systems aren't working, so now all of a sudden you don't have clean water. You gotta boil your own water, but to boil your own water requires some source of heat, some source of energy.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of the immediate I say it's narrow. It's one particular topic. Human beings want and need and value sources of energy that are reliable. And that term, we throw that term around a lot, reliable energy. I don't know that people pause to think about what that really means. Reliable, meaning not merely available when it's 70 degrees outside and it's pleasant and it'd be a nice day to go sit in the park and have a picnic. When you're in the park having a picnic, you don't need a whole lot of power, maybe a little bit to charge up your phone, but not a whole lot.
Sure.
When you need it the most are in these critical moments, right? During a blizzard, during a flood, during a drought, these moments when you need that extra power, that's when the reliability comes in.
I can tell you from experience. I lived through 2 major hurricanes living in Florida.
Yeah.
We went 3.5 weeks without power after the second one. It
How'd you
changes
do
your
it?
life.
What did you do for 3.5 weeks?
Eventually left. Eventually, I got in my car and I drove to the west coast of Florida where I had friends who they still had power. It hit the east coast of Florida a lot harder than the west coast, and after about 5 days, we said enough. Now, the only benefit I had there was I had been able to go to the gas station before the hurricane hit, prepared, got some tanks of gas, and I charged things out of my car. I plugged things into the lighter socket in the car.
Your car became a generator.
My car became a generator. The important things, I had gone and got a lot of extra bags of ice. I packed my refrigerator with ice and hoped that they would last. And we didn't open our refrigerator for days because we wanted to keep all the cold in that we could. And it was sealed and that was it. And you just didn't use it. It was an experience. Something I never, There were nights in Colorado growing up where you'd lose power and you just kind of, you tucked under a blanket and you did your best. You read a book.
And you kind of assume it's coming on the next day, right?
This was, we knew we were looking at weeks.
Wow.
And that's a difficult experience.
Yeah. What it does is it transports you back in time. All of a sudden, you're living the way people were living 500 years ago or earlier. And so this is one of among the greatest of the great inventions in human history is discovering sources of reliable energy, and not just reliable, but also affordable, right? If it's reliable, but no one can actually afford it, that's not going to help many people. We want sources of energy that are both reliable and affordable. That's kind of the narrow topic.
Now,
go ahead.
Let's clarify, though, that affordable doesn't mean not profitable, right? We have this juxtaposition, and you talk about you hope people look back after they get through all of this, we get through all of this, and they really think, what is the goal of reliable energy? There seems to be this qualifier for many on the progressive side of the aisle saying, we need energy and it's a right? Yes. Energy is a right.
Yep.
You shouldn't, profit is a bad word. You shouldn't be able to make profit out of it. But then we look and see what is the government's ability to provide reliable energy actually look like? And there are people freezing to death in Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
There are people freezing to death throughout the country right now. And how can you say, well, you can't make a profit on it, and we would rather risk people dying because we only trust the government to provide it. And there's also this sort of belief that the government doesn't profit on it, which we both know is not true.
No, that's absolutely correct. So in fact, one of the little known realities of modern governments, and these tend to be at the state and local levels, are public utility commissions.
Right.
Mainly what they do is they help promote and sell this idea that energy is a right. And they will say, hey, if you can't afford electricity in your house, there's all kinds of subsidies and coupons and various things. You're going to get electricity. Now, if you're one of the people running an electrical generation plant, you have lots of bills. It's really expensive to build and maintain, right? A big facility that generates electricity, you have a bunch of employees who expect to get paid. How are you going to do all that? What public utilities commissions do then is it's a form of central planning. So they say to these people over here, especially those who vote the way they want them to vote, you're going to get subsidized electricity. Don't you worry about paying it. And over here we have businesses, some of them big, think of big box stores. Think of how much electricity does a typical Costco or Walmart or Target, those kinds of big. Think of IKEA. How much electricity does an IKEA store use? And so those public utility commissions will turn over to these businesses and say, you over here, you are greedy businesses. You're just trying to make a profit. So we're going to charge you 5, 10, 15, 20 times the rate that we charge the residents over here, because the business per se isn't voting, but these individual citizens over here do vote. And so it becomes a form of central planning. And you're right, when you look at things that are, when we want things that are affordable, it's very interesting. I often love to think of the example of TVs. TVs are more, they're not only are they more affordable now than ever, they're better quality. Sure. I mean, I'm old enough, I remember what TVs were like in the 70s. My parents had this enormous, gigantic wooden box thing. Right? It was a piece of furniture that was as big as a sofa, and yet the actual screen was this tiny little thing.
About 12 inches diagonal.
Yeah. I mean, they would sell you on this big console because it made it look bigger, but the actual screen was this tiny little thing, and it was terrible quality. Compared to what we have today, you can go in and for $200-300, you can actually buy a high definition flat screen TV at Best Buy. And here's what's curious about that whole industry: it's one of the least regulated and least subsidized industries, because no one has said we have a right to TVs. No one has said that yet. Right. At least not in some persuasive, big political public way. And so, what do you find out there among TV producers and manufacturers? You find competition. And one, Sony comes up with a new kind of technology that they can sell, and it says, we have a slightly better picture and we're going to sell this at a slightly lower price. And then what do the competitors do? They are working their tails off to come up with an even better quality picture that they can sell at even lower prices.
Right.
And that's how we get affordable, high-quality TVs, is by markets and competition. Imagine if we thought about power generation the same way. It would revolutionize that whole industry. And
has anybody ever thought about the reliability of their TV? I mean, we're talking about reliability of energy. I don't know that anybody's ever sat back and thought, I wonder if my TV is going to turn on today. Yep. I wonder, and you talk about the picture has improved and the size has gotten better and bigger, and the price has gone down. But there's been other innovations that have come along with television that we don't necessarily think about right off the bat, but that are other ways that they're improving. They've become more energy efficient. Right? I mean, you think about one of the big things I see on televisions when you walk into any electronics store is that the Energy Star symbol running down the side on some sticker. They are naturally, through competition, saying, we know you want to pay less to watch television. We know your cable bill is more expensive, your internet bill is more expensive. We're going to make the actual operation of your television cheaper.
Yep. The unit is going to be lower priced and better quality. and the amount of money you spend to power it is going to be lower, because we're trying to make this thing as energy efficient as we possibly can, because we think that's what customers want. And our job as a profit-seeking business is to supply as much value as we possibly can for our customers. And that kind of leads me into the bigger topic here of this podcast and what I think this current Arctic storm is bringing out. For those, our fellow citizens who rush around proudly wearing the label progressive, and very many will say, well, I am progressive because I care about people. There's a premise there, right? Their premise is, if you care, you are progressive. Of course, that means if you're not progressive, then you just don't care.
Right.
You're a hater, you're mean, you're selfish, you don't care if people live or die. So for those who say, I really do care, and I'm with them on that, I do. I care about other people. I don't want to see people freezing or hungry or hurt or sick, suffering in any way. It's good to step back and ask the question, what has really helped most in the long story of human beings? So I'm not talking about just the last 5 or 10 years or 5 or 10 decades. I mean over the course of many centuries, over the course of millennia. What has improved human life the most? What has improved human health? And it turns out the answer is not. This is going to be a shocker for many people. The answer is not government-managed, taxpayer-subsidized healthcare programs. That is not what has helped improve human health the most. It has been inventions and innovations. Things like figuring out how to purify water.
Right.
That single innovation right there probably has done more to save more lives, to preserve more lives, to conserve more human life than arguably, I'm not quite sure how one would do this research, but it's way up there in terms of, because think of, before that, people were just drinking out of rivers and ponds.
Sure.
There's all kinds of microbes and nasty things in there. And that's what, to this day, that still is what kills most people, are little microbes.
I mean, think about what the average person, one of the first things the average person hears when they take their first trip to Mexico.
Yeah.
When you take your first trip to Mexico,
don't
drink the water. Montezuma's revenge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's this whole notion of they don't have the same purification standards.
Yep.
They don't drink the water. And I think what people also forget about when you talk about things like water purification, when you leave the market open, like televisions, right? Televisions started 70 years ago and have continued to improve and continue to improve and continue to improve. When you leave the market open, it's not like, okay, we purified water, time to forget about it, we're done, we're moving on. That purification process, the tools, the inventions, the innovation continues to grow over time. It gets less expensive.
Yep.
And it gets more unique, and you start getting other opportunities. I think of what my grandparents would think about the fact that my refrigerator on the front door has a water spout that goes through a water filter before, so it's already purified when it comes into the condo.
Right.
And then I put my water up against the fridge, and it's going through another filtration process. What would people have thought about that 100 years ago?
They probably would think you're paranoid, Dave.
Probably. And then you start thinking about people drinking from streams and rivers. They have these straws now. Have you seen these that people take when they go camping? They're filtration straws. And they're about
Brilliant.
2 feet long.
Yeah.
And you can literally go right into the river and start drinking, and it purifies the water as it goes up through the straw before you ever drink it. And you can take it and then you put it back in your pocket and you go on to the next. And next time you need a drink of water, you just drink straight from the river, straight through the straw, and it filters. And
so you're making this big point when we think about human health. I mean, there's no, other than maybe education, there's no single topic that dominates our politics more today than that idea of health and health care. And I want to repeat this because it's so important. Health care is a means to an end.
Right.
People who are interested in health care, what you're really interested in is health, human health. You want human beings to have health care so that they are healthy. Thinking to be, physical health it's an important human good. It's not the only human good, but it's a really important. We all want to be healthy. Nobody if you have our choice, nobody would say, I would prefer to be sick and diseased rather than being healthy. No, everybody would prefer to be healthy rather than to be sick. And we have right now in the United States 150, 200 million of our fellow citizens, when they think of human health, their minds immediately go to one topic: government-managed, subsidized healthcare.
Right.
Universal, single-payer, right, healthcare. That's all they think about when they think of healthcare. And of course, the political class feeds into this. You see these little stunts all the time when politicians give major addresses, even presidents at State of the Union addresses and other events. They'll have a person there. They want to put they want to personalize their agenda of single payer government managed healthcare. So let's say here's Fred, Smith, and Fred is really sick with this disease, and Fred doesn't have health insurance right now.
Right.
And somehow we are supposed to extrapolate from the story of Fred that we should adopt disastrous socialist central planning policies like single-payer health. But here's my bigger point. Human health requires all kinds of things that come prior to and are ultimately far more important than health care.
Sure.
I mean, I don't want to dismiss this. If either of us has a serious health problem, yes, I hope that there are physicians and medical technologies and medicines and surgeries that help us deal with the problem. But that's not what saves the most lives. What saves lives are things like purified water. Another one, this is a game-changing invention in human history, and we take it for granted. It's so simple. Screens.
Yeah.
Screens. Putting screens on our doors and our windows, because simple screens keep out disease-carrying insects and other kind of critters. In the heat of the summer, when it's uncomfortable, it's hot, it's humid, throughout most of history, people were torn between two alternatives. On the one hand, they wanted a little circulation inside their house or dwelling or cabin or whatever it was. What do you do to get some circulation? You open up the windows. And the moment you open up the windows, all kinds of bugs are flying in. And a lot of those bugs are carrying things that are just really bad for human beings. They're carrying malaria. They're carrying all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So the way to keep them out was keep the window shut, but then it becomes like an oven inside your house. Screens solve that problem, right? An inventive mind said, I think I have a way that we can have some circulation of air and keep the critters, right, with the diseases, keep them outside from coming in. These are the kinds of things that really help human health and human well-being.
Let's emphasize what you just said. I want to make sure that all gets tied together, because there's a big point about the difference between human innovation and how government responds to something like that. Mm-hmm. Human innovation was people need to be able to circulate air, and we want to prevent people from getting malaria. So let's create screens. Mm-hmm. The government response would be people are getting malaria, let's get them health care. Right?
Or more likely, let's make them shut their windows from this hour to this hour, right?
Or some combination of both, right? Yeah. But the government response is going to be to say, it's too expensive for us to take care of all of you. So you need to do this to make sure you don't get malaria. Mm-hmm. But we're going to make sure in the end you have free or available health care in order to take care of you when you get malaria, because inevitably, like COVID, everybody's going to get malaria.
Right.
And that's the difference in innovation in the private sector. Somebody's saying, I see an opportunity to invest in research on how to create some kind of barrier that allows air in but doesn't allow insects.
Yeah.
Whereas the government would say, we need to prevent that disease from happening, and we need to treat it when it does.
I've mentioned this example before. In the period after the Civil War in the United States, so I'm talking the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. Actually, this is the period of the rise of progressivism. It's very inception. This is when what we witnessed, once things settled down from the Civil War, I'm going to make a statement. I'm going to immediately qualify it. This was a period of tremendous individual liberty, with a big exception, and I don't want to ignore this. It was also among the periods of the worst race-based domestic terrorism. So if you were a black family, living in Mississippi, this was not unprecedented liberty for them.
Sure.
So it's not everybody. But for many Americans, it was this period. There's very little government regulation, very little government power being exercised over the lives and properties of many citizens. And as a result, many Americans were inventive. They were entrepreneurial. They were starting new businesses, building factories, creating entirely new industries. And so cities began to grow. For the first time in all prior history, for the first time, it was in this 1870s, 80s, 90s, where we started to see multiple cities exceeding 1 million population. This had never happened before. That's a lot of people living in close proximity. And as you can imagine, it started to create health problems. I mean, human beings, they have waste. They create their own kind of pollution and health problems. And the number one source of transportation at that time were horses.
Right.
Everybody, that's what horses. And it turns out, horses make a lot of poop. We've joked about this before.
We've talked about this a few times.
And it was a huge health problem because in big cities, there would be mountains of horse manure. They had these little carts that would go around, pick it up, and then dump it in one place. And they had mountains that were like 2, 3, 4 stories tall of horse manure. And it was attracting mosquitoes and bugs, and it was awful. And I like to challenge people. Imagine you're a regulator. You work for the government, and you're there, and you really want to help. You're looking around thinking, oh my gosh, people are getting sick. These mosquitoes are transmitting terrible diseases, and all this horse waste is getting into the drinking water and things like that. What would you do? You're a regulator. You got your clipboard there, and you have your lapel, with your title and everything on it. Lanyard, that's what they call it.
Yeah.
You have your lanyard. All you can do as government is you can prohibit, you can stop, you can control. You can say, we're limiting the number of horses you have, or we're limiting the amount your horse eats, or somehow restrict, control, constrain, restrain, regulate.
We're going to restrict where you can ride your horse.
Something, yeah. And then imagine if you have the mind of Henry Ford. What might you do? You don't have to constrain anyone. You have to control anyone. You can say, I got an idea for a new device that will eliminate the need for the horse.
Right.
You're not going to need horses to be able to move from one place to another. You're going to be able to go on by way of a horseless carriage. And it solves this tremendous health problem. And of course, just like you were describing with TVs and other technologies, what happens to the technology of cars? Very quickly, they become much better, much more reliable, much safer, much more energy efficient, much cleaner burning in a matter of a few decades. And so this is kind of the big theme here of this podcast is, for those who say they care about human health and human well-being, then they really ought to care about human freedom.
Sure.
Because where human beings are free, the freer they are, the more inventive they are. And in general, usually, what are people inventing? Well, they're inventing things that they think others want, that they think others value. So inventors typically, especially if they're entrepreneurial kind of inventors, they're business inventors. They want to invent something that will help themselves get wealthy. They want to get wealthy for themselves. They have a profit incentive. So what do they have to think about? They got to think about other people. What other people want? What challenges do other people have in their lives? What problems could I help solve?
And they have to think about, what are the harms? I have an invention, and I'm going to take it to market. I also have to be aware of not only the benefits I'm providing to people, but what are the potential harms that are going to come of this invention, and how do I address those in advance so I don't get sued later?
Yep.
And what we end up running into when government gets involved, when government starts choosing which inventions they want to be successful, which they don't, we end up with businesses creating things absent thinking forward about the harms. We can use Tesla as the perfect example, or electric powered cars in general. I don't want to single out Tesla. There's no reason to.
Right.
It's all of these electric powered cars. There are a lot of harms that are coming from the change over to electric vehicles. because government is forcing that change to happen.
Yep.
It's not saying to people, okay, if you would rather drive an electric car, here's your opportunity. You can go buy one, and they'll charge you, and they'll make market price and see what people are willing to pay. Instead, they're saying, we want everybody to go this way. We're going to start mandating it by this date. And the result is...
Let me just add a few details here. I've done some work with a number of car dealerships in Colorado and other places. So this is coming in several forms, these incentives. One is the government is taking money from us, it's taxing us, and then it's offering subsidies. It's paying.
Right.
And you know, a lot of these electric cars are not inexpensive. Like the one you just mentioned, some of the Teslas are very expensive cars. Who's buying those cars? In general, wealthy people.
Sure.
I mean, I'm guilty of a generalization here, but I'm going to go out on a ledge and say not a lot of really poor people are buying high-end Teslas. It's wealthy people buying high-end Teslas, and government is taxing working Americans to subsidize so that they'll buy more. And the other thing that's happening is then they're going to the dealerships and they're saying, hey, you dealer, you better sell this quantity, this number of electric cars next year. And if you don't, if you fail, we're going to fine you.
Right.
We're going to start fining you for every gas-powered car that you sell and every one that you fall short of your quota. And so it's penalizing businesses that sell cars.
And potentially take your license away.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you don't sell enough, we might not let you sell any cars at all. If you don't sell enough electric cars, we might just take away your business from you altogether.
Right. So you have all the subsidies, but what about the long-term problem? What you do is government starts saying, well, we have all these electric cars, so we don't need as much power. We don't need as much coal power. We don't need as much gas power. We don't need natural gas. And then all of a sudden,
I got a feeling, Dave, you're going to tell me we need more than ever.
Well, go back to the beginning of this conversation. You have Texas, the energy capital of arguably of the world right now. I mean, there was a point in 2019 that for the first time since the 1950s, the United States was sending out more energy, more oil, more natural gas than it was using itself. We were so self-independent. We were actually selling to other countries more than we were actually using on our own. Right. Energy independence. We made that turn, and most of that was coming out of Texas. And now that very same state is having rolling blackouts. Right. Because so much of that energy has been pushed into electrical energy, has been pushed into windmills, has been pushed into solar power. And when it gets this cold and when we don't have all that power, all of a sudden, none of that works anymore.
When the windmills are frozen shut, you've probably seen this image floating around, right? And it's a real image.
Yeah.
It's a helicopter. Now, I'm pretty sure helicopters run on fossil fuels, right?
Yes.
Fuel, gas. And there's this gigantic windmill frozen. It's stuck. And so the helicopter's hovering, burning however many, probably hundreds of gallons an hour. And it's spraying this chemical that is petroleum-based. Right. It's a de-icer, right? It's petroleum-based onto the windmill to try to get it, to be unstuck. And your whole story there also drives home that point about the reliability, right? You want this energy to be reliable, and it's not reliable. When the snow covers the solar panels aren't very good at retrieving energy from the sun.
Well, and think about what the entrepreneur would be saying, right? If I'm an entrepreneur, if I'm any of these electric car makers, I can say, it's the government's responsibility to provide you energy for my car. If you buy an electric vehicle and there's no energy to power your car, I'm sorry, it's not my fault. It's the government. The government's the one who's supposed to be providing you energy. Whereas in a free market, they're not just thinking about how do we build an electric car, but how do we also make sure that there's energy going to it.
Well, look at Texas right now. As we speak, it's freezing cold in San Antonio, in Dallas, in Houston. In fact, I think you mentioned all the way down into was it Corpus Christi or
no, into Mexico.
Oh, into Mexico.
Into northern Mexico. They've
freezing.
They have dropped below zero at different points throughout northern Mexico.
So, and this is a great exercise for our listeners and our members of the Vino Veritas Society to really think this through. Okay, there's a crunch on the electrical grid. There's demand all of a sudden has gotten more than the supply is. What would government do in that situation? Well, we know what government is doing is saying, stop using energy.
Yeah.
Turn your damn thermostat down. Don't think you're supposed to be warm, right? Don't use so much. Just like I was saying, regulate, constrict, restrict, constrain. What would entrepreneurs be doing right now? Entrepreneurs would be looking, if they were free to do the things they'd want to do, they'd say, I got an idea for some huge, huge amounts of reliable, affordable energy. Right. Let us drill the oil. Let us explore the natural gas. Let us get the coal out of the ground. And we can promise you will never, nobody's ever going to freeze to death.
There's an analogy to what you just said. And I think about this. I'm going to take this a step back because I'm going to reference something you've taught quite a bit and loop it back to this conversation. You talk about government, and you've in the past compared government to an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Right? Saying to women, what if your husband, your boyfriend demanded to know where you were, how you were spending your money, what you were doing every minute of every day, what you were looking at, what on your computers, what you were doing, and would you stay in that kind of a relationship? And the answer always is obviously not. That's an abusive, controlling relationship.
We actually did some focus groups, right? and we focused on women, and we would pose that question. We say, imagine there's a man in your life.
Right.
And he's suspicious and he's jealous and he wants to know where you are and how you're spending your money and your time, but you don't get to know what he does. What would you think about that? And universally, right, these women are like, that's a bunch of BS. I'm not tolerating that. I'm kicking him out. I want nothing to do with that.
So now let's apply this to our current situation. You're married.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a generalization. And I know this isn't with everybody, but I'm going to make a generalization about men and women.
Yep.
Most men are more often warm than cold.
Yeah.
And most women are more often cold than warm, unless you live in a place like South Florida or Houston on your average day, not on Arctic vortex.
I think anyone who's ever worked in an office setting has experienced this, because very often in an office, a climate-controlled office, even in the middle of summer, right, the guys always turn the air conditioning down to make it colder, and then the women are walking over and bumping it back up because they're too cold.
So how would it go over? How would it go over in your household? And I don't know if your wife is one of these people who's always one of these women who's always cold, but how would it go over if you said, I'm keeping the temperature down. I either A, I don't want to spend the money on heating the house, or B, I like it cold. And saying, if you don't like it, go put a sweatshirt on. How's that going to go over? My guess is you're sleeping on the couch tonight.
Well, so this is proof that you and I don't script these ahead of time.
Right.
Because in my situation at home, I'm a really bad example for this. I'm married to a woman who these last days, when it's been dropping down below zero, you know what she does?
Opens the window?
She cracks the window open at night.
That's what I do.
I know, it drives me crazy. Our bedroom is like an icebox in the morning when we wake up. So I'm not the best example, but point very well taken. What would happen in many relations if someone said, look, I'm in control here, and it's going to be cold. Damn it. And if you don't like it, you go do something about it. Go put on some other clothes. People in their private lives would say that's outrageous. I'm not going to let my husband or wife, dictate those terms to me. But that's precisely what government's doing.
Right.
Government's saying, you're going to keep it cold. We're shutting off the power.
Right.
Go put on a sweater if you don't like it.
And they're shutting off the power because they've said that power is too dangerous to your children, your children's children, your children's children's children. We believe. I mean, that's their claim.
You're talking about the threat of
climate change
disaster
and everything else.
Right.
And if we don't cut off the power
right.
and start forcing you to use electric power, which at the end of the day, it's all created in very much the same way. And then we were talking earlier about all the unintended consequences, the things that an entrepreneur is going to think about that the government doesn't. But in the long run, they're saying, look, we're cutting off the natural gas. You're not going to frack anymore. You're not going to use coal and fossil fuels anymore. And if you don't like it, too bad, go put a sweatshirt on.
Right.
If you don't like that you're going to have blackouts and you can't watch television, or you can't use your computer, have internet, all of these things that have become part of our daily lives, it's too bad. It's for the general welfare. It's for the general good.
That's what government does. I want to give a very personal and put a face here on the example of the entrepreneurial mind. So this is a relative in the family. This is one of my wife's cousins, married to a young man who's a brilliant guy, and he just finished his PhD in physics.
Okay.
And given the modern state of technology today, he was able to broadcast his dissertation defense through the internet. And I sat in and watched. Well, back in my day when I defended my dissertation, it was just a handful of graduate students and the graduate faculty there. But he was able to invite family and friends, and we could watch online, and I did. And he's been working in the field of nuclear energy as he's been going through graduate school. And I think he'll probably be in that field maybe for the rest of his life. He's really good at it, knows a lot about it. And so this entrepreneurial young man, his dissertation is an invention. He wrote up all the research he did on an invention, and the invention is within the. Here I'm about to reach the limit of my knowledge of a nuclear power plant. Okay,
it's probably beyond mine because at least you heard the defense of the dissertation.
Well, that's right. So there's a certain type of nuclear reactor. It's called a pebble field. The pieces of, I think it's uranium, or I don't know what it is, but it's this nuclear material, and it's in a chamber, and that's where the actual reaction happens. These things get really hot. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea is to heat. Ultimately, the thing heats up water. It makes it boil, so you get steam that turns a generator. That's how every nuclear reactor works. And the great danger to people who invest their capital, their time, their life into building a nuclear reactor, the great danger is what's happening inside that reaction chamber. You want to know what's happening in there. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy to know because you can't just stick a thermometer in there. The temperatures get so high and there's so much radioactive energy in there, it melts and destroys everything. And so he came up with a special gauge that has multiple ways of cross-checking all these things so that they can know what the temperature is in there, how much energy is being transmitted and released and all that, ultimately to make it safer so that the people running the plant can at any time know exactly what's happening inside that reaction chamber. That's what an entrepreneur does, right? Thinking ahead of, okay, I want to build this thing, and this is part of my business. I want to be able to generate electricity and sell electricity, and I can't have my plant melting down. I mean, obviously, it would hurt a lot of people. I don't want that, and I also don't want to melt my own capital, right? I want to protect and preserve these things. I'm looking for ways to protect this. He's on the cutting edge of nuclear energy research. The thing he just invented, this I think he's about 32 or 33-year-old young physicist, no bureaucrat could have regulated that because no bureaucrat knows about it.
Right.
Matt just invented this thing, and that's the difference between the bureaucratic mind, control, regulate, restrict, constrain, versus the entrepreneurial mind of, what's a solution to the problem? What can I invent?
And here's where government makes it so much worse. I mean, exactly in this situation, he just solved something for nuclear power plants. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you've got these bureaucrats over here who are saying, we're not going to allow nuclear power no matter how safe you can make it.
Right.
We decided years ago, and it doesn't matter how it changes, it doesn't matter how much you can improve it, we decided years ago that nuclear power is not safe, and therefore we will not be using it. We are going to use windmills that we have to de-thaw on a regular basis. We're going to use solar panels. We're going to use these alternative energies, this Green New Deal. We're going to go that route. And we are going to invest so much money into that system, and we're going to take so much taxpayer dollars to put into that model that it doesn't matter anything you invent, there's not going to be nuclear power on our shores.
And that's a really important point because I'm inclined to say, and there's some truth to this, that free people are where you find invention and innovation. And I think on balance, that's true. Now, it would be false to say there's never innovation or invention that comes from government. Government will sometimes back, it'll support, it'll subsidize certain kinds of invention or innovation, usually because it has a political interest in it, or maybe some crony friend is running the business that's getting the grant or the contract. But here's the difference. Free people who are inventing and innovating, they have to take their invention, take their business idea out to their fellow citizens, fellow mankind, and say, here's what I have to offer.
Right.
Do you find this useful or valuable? If people say, no, not really, we don't really like it, he goes back to the drawing board. Can he come up with something else that they value and find useful? Whereas when government gets involved, what they do is they say, we're going to do this thing and we are prohibiting everything else. You're not going to do it. We don't care what kind of sources of power generation this guy came up with over here. We're prohibiting that. We're regulating that, controlling that. We're going to do the thing that we command is going to be done.
You can go back to the Henry Ford horseless carriage example, right? And horseless carriage goes back to Daimler and things like that in the sort of mid to late 1800s. But Henry Ford sort of made it a mass marketable opportunity. And that's what's key in all of this, right? It started off as something that wasn't really available to everybody. So government looked at it and said, yeah, I mean, that's probably nice. If that was today, our government would say, yeah, that's kind of nice, but it's not really accessible to everybody. It's not really safe. So we're going to just keep focusing on the horse, and we're not going to allow that to happen. We're not going to allow that to grow. Whereas because we had more freedom at that time, you had this opportunity for Henry Ford to say, I see something happening in Europe with this horseless carriage, and I can make it available to the masses. And then there's also all of the people who get involved in other aspects of that, whether it's manufacturing parts or different things, that there's more innovation and there's more invention there. Henry Ford needed different things. And I'm going to make a comparison here that I think you're going to really like. Your cousin or your wife's cousin, I would compare to somebody who you've looked up to for a very long time and introduced me to in Harry Earhart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Harry Earhart made Henry Ford's dream of a mass market horseless carriage available because of a patented process to refine oil.
Yeah.
Right now,
listen. We have to tell our listeners. So Harry B. Earhart. He's usually listed as H.B. Earhart, and I learned about Earhart because Earhart set up a very elite selective graduate fellowship. And some of the great freedom minds in the modern period were Earhart fellows in graduate school, including people like Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was an Earhart fellow. Tom Sowell was an Earhart fellow. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, was an Earhart fellow. And I know about this because yours truly, Tom Cranwitter, was an Earhart fellow. And Harry Earhart, in the 19-teens, right? So this is the auto industry is just starting to go. And what do you need if you're going to sell a lot of cars to a lot of Americans? They need affordable gas and affordable oil to lubricate the engines. And Harry Earhart, right, he didn't know how to build a car. What he did know how to do was how to refine crude oil into usable lubricants and gasoline much more efficiently, much more affordable than anyone had ever done before. And so Harry Earhart helps Henry Ford's business grow exponentially. And Harry Earhart, of course, becomes fabulously wealthy himself at the same time.
And Harry Earhart had to go and sell Henry Ford on, look at how great this product is and how much it's going to help you. And in the same way, right now, we have this need for more affordable, cleaner burning, safer, better for the environment, everything. I mean, I don't think anybody wants pollution, right? I mean, I don't care where you stand on climate change or anything else. Nobody actually wants to live in a polluted city. I've been to Mexico City. I've gotten off that airplane and felt that smog. So nobody wants that. So the key here is if you left it up to the market and said, here's nuclear energy And it's not that safe. It's safe, but it's not as safe as we'd like it to be. Mm-hmm. And then we have all these other options. And every option has its positives and its negatives. Mm-hmm. Now you have this guy who comes along and says, I can make nuclear energy safer.
Right.
How many Americans would say, I want that? I think the risk is mitigated enough to make nuclear energy the way we should move forward in the future, all because of your cousin.
Yeah.
And the government's saying no. The government's saying, no, we've already committed to this path. We are already invested billions of dollars into this path, billions of dollars of your and my money and everybody else's money.
And
right?
you ask the bureaucrats, but what do you know about the technology, the science, the physics of this thing this young man has just invented? Doesn't matter. They don't know.
Right.
They don't know and they don't care.
But they do say trust the science. I mean, isn't that the entire foundation of the progressive movement?
And here's the sort of the big, and this maybe is the big takeaway of this whole conversation. When government gets involved, and we've acknowledged it does sometimes subsidize and support certain crony, politically preferred forms of innovation.
Sure.
But the bigger general influence that government has is to stifle innovation, is to slow invention and entrepreneurial, real progress, technological progress. And so for those people out there, our fellow citizens who say, I really care about people. I want people to be healthy. I want them to, first of all, not need health care as much because they're just healthier. And then when they do have health problems, I want them to be able to get the kind of health care, the medical attention that they need. We can all agree on that.
Sure.
And then when we look at, well, so what should government be doing? The very first answer is get out of the way.
Right.
Get out of the way, because when there's more innovation and invention, those things will help more people.
Yep, absolutely. One last story, and I had just heard about somebody who's been working on a portable MRI machine that was really invented for athletes. It's for the sidelines of a football game to be able to take a quick, immediate MRI by just pointing
in that mysterious blue tent.
Right, in that mysterious blue tent on the side of a football field or in a baseball dugout. You know, these guys get hurt and they need feedback right away. But because of Medicare and socialized health care and all of these things, the government is making them go through so many more hoops just to be able to get this thing to market. Yep. When in reality, this is a great invention that's cheaper to manufacture, is easier to use, could be kept in every doctor's office as opposed to needing a big room. And instead, they're saying, well, I don't know if we should cover it with Medicare, and I don't know if we should allow the regulation. These are the ways that the government just continues to stifle innovation. And the only way we're going to take our next step as a people, as human beings, is to get government out of the way, and you know, I'll say it. That's why we are guarding freedom.
We have another example right in front of us: the vaccine, the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
I discussed this in my. I think we have a copy up there. My book on the swamp, which is a work of satire called "Save the Swamp." We actually want to remove the swamp, drain the swamp, right. But it's meant to be funny, and. I have a whole section in there where I talk about the FDA. And on average, over the last 2 decades, it has taken between 9 and 13 years. That's the average. 9 and 13 years to bring a medicine to market, to be able to sell it, to get it through that FDA approval. Now, if that's the average, 9 to 13 years, that means some of them are taking 15 years, 16 years, 17 years.
More.
And of course, you ask the question, who would invest their capital, large amounts of their capital, into research and development for a medicine that A, may never be allowed to be sold, and B, even if it is allowed to be sold, won't be sold for a decade or more?
Right.
And the answer is not many people. A lot of people with capital looking, where should I invest? They think, screw that. I'm going to go invest my capital somewhere else, not into medical research, because of what the FDA has done. And along comes COVID, and it has lots of advantages for the political class to look like they're doing things. And you know what the number one thing that the regulators at the FDA did to make this vaccine happen so quickly? They got out of the way.
Right.
Got out of the way.
And all that goes to prove is they're not necessary.
Yep.
It just proves that we don't need 13 to 15 years to get a medicine to market, to get new products to market. Let innovators innovate, and let's get them to market and let people and doctors make the decisions.
And all this is why we need guardians of the American idea, guardians of the idea of freedom, which is what we do at the Vino Veritas Society.
We will continue to advocate for freedom and be the guardians.
Nos somos custodes.